caught my landlord selling my belongings to cover his own rent, so I made an investigation. I was renting a small apartment in a decent part of town, nothing fancy but comfortable enough for me and my stuff. I'd been there for about a year, paying rent on time every month. No issues with the landlord, a guy named Greg. He seemed normal at first, middle-aged, always in a hurry, but he'd respond to maintenance requests and kept the building in okay shape. I worked long hours at my job, so I wasn't home much, but I noticed Greg started acting weird around the 6-month mark. He'd show up unannounced to check the pipes or inspect the windows, which felt off since he never gave a heads up. I brushed it off as him being overly involved, but it started to bug me. One weekend, I came back from a work trip and noticed my place felt different. My bookshelf was missing a couple of collectible figures I'd spent years tracking down. They weren't cheap, maybe $200 each, and I was sure I hadn't misplaced them. I tore the apartment apart looking for them, thinking maybe I'd moved them during a cleaning spree, but they were gone. Then I noticed other things missing, a vintage lamp I'd gotten from a flea market, a set of kitchen knives I'd splurged on, even a leather jacket I kept in the closet. I started wondering if I'd been robbed, but there were no signs of a break-in. The locks were fine, no windows were broken, and nothing else in the building seemed off. I reported it to the police, but they didn't take it seriously. They said it could have been someone with a key, but without proof, there wasn't much they could do. I asked Greg if he'd seen anything weird, and he just shrugged, saying maybe I'd misplaced the stuff or someone borrowed it. Borrowed it? That didn't even make sense. I started keeping a closer eye on things, documenting what I had left in case more went missing. I even set up a cheap security camera in my living room, one of those motion-activated ones you can check from your phone. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even Greg. A couple weeks later, I got a notification from the camera while I was at work. I opened the app and saw Greg in my apartment, poking around my stuff. He wasn't fixing anything. He was picking up my gaming console, looking it over, then putting it in a box. I couldn't believe it. I watched him take a few other things, like a pair of headphones and a stack of vinyl records I'd collected. My heart was racing, but I stayed calm and saved the footage. I didn't confront him right away because I wanted to figure out what he was doing with my stuff. I started digging. I checked local online marketplaces thinking maybe he was selling my things. Sure enough, I found one of my figures listed on a site, same condition, same limited edition markings. The seller's profile didn't have Greg's name, but the location was close to our building, and the account was new. I took screenshots of everything. Then I found my lamp listed on another site. Same deal. It was too much to be a coincidence. I realized Greg was taking my stuff and selling it, probably thinking I wouldn't notice since I was gone a lot. I was furious but kept it together. I needed proof that would hold up, not just suspicions. I checked the camera footage every day, and over the next week, Greg came back twice, each time taking something small but valuable. I saved every clip. I also started asking neighbors if they'd noticed anything weird with Greg. One guy mentioned Greg had been complaining about money problems, saying he was behind on his own rent for the building. That's when it clicked. Greg was stealing my stuff to cover his own financial mess. I decided to confront him, but not directly. I wanted to catch him in the act, or at least get enough evidence to make a case. I kept monitoring the camera and the online listings. I even bought one of my own items back from a marketplace, just the figure, to have proof it was mine. The seller met me at a coffee shop, and it wasn't Greg, but some guy who said he got it from a friend. I didn't push it, just paid and left. I was building a paper trail. By this point, I was obsessed with figuring out how deep this went. I started wondering if Greg was doing this to other tenants. I talked to a few more people in the building, casually asking if they'd noticed anything missing. One woman said she thought her jewelry had been misplaced, and another guy mentioned his expensive speakers vanished a month ago. Nobody had connected it to Greg, but I started to suspect he was running a side hustle with all our stuff. I knew I had to do something, but I needed to be smart about it. I wasn't just going to let him get away with this. I was sitting on a pile of evidence, but I needed to be strategic. The camera footage, screenshots of my stuff on online marketplaces, and the figure I'd bought back were solid, but I wanted to make sure Greg couldn't wiggle out of this. I started thinking about how to approach the situation without tipping him off. My first move was to secure my apartment. I changed the locks myself, which I knew wasn't exactly legal since I was a renter, but I wasn't about to let Greg keep walking in. I didn't tell him about the new locks, and I kept the old ones in a drawer in case he noticed. I spent the next few days talking to more tenants in the building. I didn't want to come off as paranoid, so I kept it casual, asking if anyone had lost anything recently. 2 more people confirmed missing items, a designer purse and a set of golf clubs. They hadn't reported it because, like me, they thought they'd misplaced their stuff or it was a random theft. I didn't mention Greg yet, but I suggested they check online marketplaces and keep an eye out. I also asked if they'd seen Greg in their apartments without notice. One tenant said he'd caught Greg checking the smoke alarms unannounced a month ago, which lined up with when his golf clubs disappeared. I decided to dig deeper into Greg's financial situation. I wasn't a detective, but I figured if he was selling our stuff to cover his rent, there might be a paper trail. I searched public records online and found out the building was owned by a property management company, not Greg directly. He was just the landlord they hired to manage the place. I called the company, pretending to be a prospective tenant, and asked about the building's management. They confirmed Greg was their guy, but got cagey when I asked about his performance. That told me they might already have issues with him. Meanwhile, my camera caught Greg trying to get into my apartment again. He fiddled with the lock, looked confused, and left after a minute. I saved that footage too. It showed he didn't have a legit reason to be there. I started checking the online listings daily, and more of my stuff popped up, along with items I recognized from other tenants' descriptions. The designer purse was listed on the same site as my lamp, and the golf clubs showed up on another. I took screenshots of everything and started cross-referencing the seller accounts. They all used different names, but the locations were always within a few miles of the building. I knew I had enough to confront Greg, but I wanted to go bigger. I contacted a lawyer friend from work who did some pro bono legal advice on the side. I showed her the evidence, camera footage, screenshots, the figure I'd bought back, and notes from my conversations with other tenants. She said I had a strong case for theft and possibly breach of lease, but I'd need to prove Greg was the one selling the items. The footage of him taking my stuff was a good start, but linking him to the online sales would seal it. She suggested setting up a sting to catch him in the act of selling. I decided to bait Greg. I listed a fake item online, a rare gaming console bundle that didn't exist but matched the kind of stuff he was taking. I used a burner email and set the pickup location at a park near the building. I described the console in a way that would catch his attention, saying it was a limited edition worth a lot. Sure enough, I got a response from a new account asking to meet up. I didn't show up myself. Instead, I had my lawyer friend go to the meetup spot with a friend of hers who was a notary. They recorded the interaction from a distance. The guy who showed up wasn't Greg, but he matched the description of the person I'd bought my figure from. He didn't have the console, obviously, but he mentioned he could get similar items from a guy who manages a building nearby. That was close enough. I took all this to the police again, this time with my lawyer friend's help. They were more interested now that I had video evidence and a clear pattern. They agreed to look into Greg, but they warned me it could take time to build a criminal case. I wasn't willing to wait that long. My stuff was still being sold and other tenants were losing things too. My lawyer friend suggested filing a civil lawsuit against Greg for theft and damages. She helped me draft a complaint, and we included the other tenants who'd lost items as co-plaintiffs. We filed it in small claims court, figuring it was the fastest way to get some justice. The day we served Greg the papers was intense. I had a process server deliver them to him at the building. He looked shocked, then tried to play it cool, saying it was a misunderstanding. I didn't say a word to him. I'd let the legal process do the talking. I was ready for court, but I had no idea how Greg would respond or what he'd try to pull next. The weeks leading up to the court date were nerve-wracking. I kept collecting evidence, checking my camera footage, and monitoring online marketplaces for more of my stuff or the other tenants' belongings. Greg stopped coming to my apartment after he realized the locks were changed, but I caught him loitering around the building more than usual, probably trying to figure out what I was up to. I didn't engage with him at all. I wanted everything to go through the legal process. My lawyer friend helped me and the other tenants organize our case, making sure we had all the documentation lined up. Screenshots of the listings, camera footage, the figure I'd bought back, and statements from everyone who'd lost items. We also reached out to the property management company again, this time with a formal letter detailing Greg's actions. They didn't respond right away, but I got the sense they were starting to take it seriously because one of their reps showed up at the building a few days later, asking tenants questions. I didn't tell them about the lawsuit yet, but I shared some of the evidence with them anonymously through a neighbor. I figured the more pressure on Greg, the better. When the court date arrived, I was prepared but anxious. Small claims court wasn't like a TV drama. No fancy lawyers or dramatic outbursts, but it was still intense. Me and the other tenants, 3 of us in total, presented our case together. We showed the judge the camera footage of Greg taking my stuff, the screenshots of our items on marketplaces, and the receipt from when I bought back my own figure. We also had written statements from other tenants who'd noticed Greg in their apartments without permission. My lawyer friend had coached us on how to present everything clearly, sticking to the facts and avoiding any emotional tangents. Greg showed up looking flustered. He tried to argue that he was just borrowing items to stage the building for new tenants, and that he planned to return everything. It was a weak excuse, and the judge didn't seem to buy it. He couldn't explain why my stuff ended up on online marketplaces, or why he was in my apartment without notice. The footage of him taking my console was especially damning. He didn't even try to deny it was him. He also claimed the other tenants' missing items were unrelated, but the judge pointed out the pattern was too clear to ignore. The property management company sent a representative to the hearing, which I didn't expect. They didn't say much, but they confirmed Greg was their employee and that they'd started an internal investigation after our letter. That seemed to rattle Greg even more. The judge ruled in our favor, ordering Greg to pay damages for the value of our stolen items. About $2,500 for me, $1,800 for the tenant with the designer purse, and $2,000 for the one with the golf clubs. The judge also ordered him to cover court fees. It wasn't a fortune, but it felt like a win. After the hearing, things moved fast. The property management company fired Greg a week later, and they sent out a letter to all tenants apologizing for the situation. They replaced him with a new landlord who seemed way more professional. I got a check from Greg for my portion of the damages a month later, though I heard he was still fighting the other tenants' payments. I didn't care much at that point. I had my money, and my apartment felt safe again. The police never filed criminal charges, which was frustrating. They said there wasn't enough evidence to prove intent beyond the civil case, but I was okay with that. The lawsuit had done its job, and Greg was out of our lives. I replaced most of my stolen stuff, though some things, like my vinyl records, were harder to let go of. The other tenants and I stayed in touch, and we made a group chat to keep an eye on the building, just in case. Looking back, I learned a lot about standing up for myself. Setting up that camera was the best decision I made. It turned a hunch into hard proof. I also realized how important it is to document everything and not let stuff slide when something feels off. Greg probably thought he could get away with it because we were just tenants, but we proved him wrong. The whole experience was a hassle, but it felt good to take control and get justice, even if it was just in small claims court.